Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. You are very welcome to join us here on The Breakfast Show on Sky News this Wednesday morning. The cost of living set to ramp up today for millions of workers as the national insurance hike kicks in as part of a plan to raise cash for the NHS and social care. Is it worth it? We'll ask the Health Secretary Sajid Javid very shortly. Plus, as the West prepares to hit Russia with even more sanctions, a bold claim from Russia. We'll ask the former head of the Armed Forces, General Lord Dannatt, about that. The leader of the Lib Dems, Sir Ed Davey, is with us, as is Labour's Peter Kyle, also on the programme. Pretty packed, isn't it? It's Wednesday, the 6th of April. New sanctions to target Russia as Sky News questions Russia's top men at the UN about pictures of civilian bodies in Bucha.
Don't forget that the video that President Zelensky displayed today is a fake. Read my Twitter.
I'm in Ukraine, where President Zelensky says the measures imposed by the West must match the crimes committed by Russia.
Pay packet pressure, higher national insurance contributions to begin for millions of workers from today to raise cash for the NHS and social care.
I'm at a petrol station in Essex as prices at the pump surged by their fastest rate on record despite a cut in fuel duty.
Divorce on demand. The biggest shake-up in divorce law in half a century ends the blame game and makes it easier to cut ties. I'm in love with your body. Can you tell the difference? Did Sami switch his OY help to shape Ed Sheeran's #1 hit? That's the accusation before a court. A judge will deliver its decision just before 10 this morning. We'll bring that to you live. Also coming up on the programme for you, wherever you're watching us around the world today, the departure of Manchester Airport's MD follows chaotic scenes there. We'll get tips on how to plan your Easter holiday from a trio of industry experts. And also the theatre that opened its doors as a food bank over the pandemic. We'll speak to the artistic director of the Slung Low in Leeds about the difficulties people are facing now amid spiralling bills. Very good morning, everybody. Could Russia be facing more sanctions? And will it make any difference to their manoeuvres in Ukraine? Let's bring you the latest developments so far this morning. Got more details for you in just a few moments' time. Fresh UK intelligence says Russian troops may have prevented aid reaching the 160,000 people still trapped in Mariupol in an attempt to force a defeat. EU leaders meet today in Strasbourg to discuss proposed new sanctions, including a ban on Russian coal imports. Meanwhile, the Kiev region police chief has told Sky News 1,200 war crimes have been registered in the area. Sky News has seen more evidence of civilian bodies in Bucha. Russia's ambassador to the UN told our US correspondent, Mark Stone, the video is a fake. Here's his report.
It was the weekend images emerging from Bucha which prompted this meeting of the Security Council. They'd invited Volodymyr Zelensky to join them, but were not prepared for what he would show them. What they saw in the chamber cannot be broadcast here, but the images of dead bodies are horrific. They're from several towns across Ukraine, some of them charred, hands tied behind backs, women and children among them. We cannot yet independently verify the context behind them, but the pattern is clear: killings, mass executions, rapes. Zelensky called for Russia, with its power to veto anything this place tries to do, be removed from the council.
Remove Russia as an aggressor and a source of war, so it cannot block decisions about its own aggression, its own war.
But there is no mechanism for Russia's removal, and so its top diplomat is free to claim that all these allegations are nonsense.
You say it's all fabrication, what's happening in Bucha? It's all a fabrication?
I said that these photographs appeared only on the 3rd of April, while we left the place on the 30th of March.
But the satellite evidence shows those bodies were there when you were in charge of that town.
It's not true.
Nothing today can be taken for granted, okay?
And don't forget that the video that President Zelensky displayed today is a fake. Read my Twitter.
Why is it fake?
Because it is a fake. It was...
The people are not dead?
The people are dead, but they were shot elsewhere where there were no Russian troops. It appeared before. Read the internet, read the users.
The UK holds the current presidency of the Security Council and had called the urgent meeting.
I suspect that the Security Council has never seen a video with such horrifying images on it. I don't think there's any reason to doubt those images. The important thing now is that there is accountability for what is clearly war crimes.
From this top body down, Russia is truly isolated now, and yet the killing goes on. The focus ahead is to build a case against it, to counter the denials with facts and evidence. Mark Stone, Sky News in New York.
Dominic standing by in Lviv for us again this morning in Western Ukraine. Hello to you, Dominic. Hearing from Russia, they're just not buying it. They're saying all of this is completely fake.
I mean, yeah, they're lying through their teeth, Kay, aren't they? As they did over the Skripal affair, as they did in Chechnya, as they did in Syria. And we're hearing a number of versions of events by different Russian diplomats, and that's their playbook. That's their modus operandi. It's to tell lots of different lies, to cast enough doubt, not to necessarily put forward a compelling version of the truth, but to obscure the truth. Nebenzier there sounding confident, airily confident that just read his Twitter, go on the internet, you'll see that these videos are fakes. Whereas the satellite imagery we're seeing, the harrowing eyewitness testimony from our reporters and many others, and what the Ukrainians are saying, and what international investigators are finding in Bucha and other places, is evidence of a massacre committed by the Russians, not just there, but evidence of similar things going on in other parts of Ukraine. They're also using weapons that shouldn't be used in war, like cluster bombs. The MSF saying that they saw cluster bombs being used against a hospital in Mykolaiv. So a whole catalogue of atrocities being committed by the Russians, and the Ukrainians are hugely impatient and frustrated with the response in the West. They say the sanctions that are being considered now are simply not enough, because the EU is handing over 775 million euros a day for oil and gas. They are considering, or they're going to stop coal imports, but coal imports come to 4 billion euros a year. So that's effectively 4 days worth of oil and gas payments to the Russians. And what the Ukrainians are saying is that money is going to be used directly to fund the next phase in this war. That money that Europeans are paying for their oil and gas, for their manufacturing industry, and to have their homes heated, is going to go into Russia's military, that will pay for replacing the hundreds of tanks and armoured personnel carriers and heavy armour they've lost there for the next phase in the war, which the Ukrainians say is completely unacceptable.
Okay, Dominic, thank you. Lots to put to the Health Secretary this morning, Sajid Javid, who is joining us now. Hello to you, Health Secretary. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Let's start with
Good morning.
Ukraine, if we may. You're a father of 4, as I know. When you see images like those on the front page of, say, the Daily Mirror this morning, where a little girl has got her contact details written on her back in case her parents are murdered by Putin and his henchmen, how much does that strengthen your resolve to have him removed from office?
I think it strengthens the resolve for all of us. What we're seeing unfolding now in Ukraine is absolutely appalling. These atrocities we're now sadly seeing almost daily on our TV screens. And the image you just talked of, when I first saw that image, I think yesterday, it could have been my daughter. It could be anyone's daughter, their son. And just to think that's what parents are having to do in Ukraine right now because of the choice that Vladimir Putin has made. And we should never forget, this is a choice. This was not a war for any other reason than something that Vladimir Putin had just chosen to do. And we will continue to help Ukraine in every way that we can, whether that's military support, whether it's with support for sanctions on Russia and humanitarian support.
And does that include regime change?
Look, it's ultimately up to the Russian people about the leadership of their country. But I do think the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, was right yesterday to appeal directly to the Russian people in the way that he did. I know a lot of Russians. I'm sure many of people listening do, and they are the vast majority. They're just ordinary, decent, compassionate people. And do they really want to see this war unfolding, especially in the way that it is in their name? And there's an opportunity for them to make their feelings heard to their own government. And I hope that they listen to Boris Johnson and others and react.
OK. You're in a hospital today, of course, because you want to talk to us about the hike in national insurance. How on earth can it be a fair tax? It does seem to unfairly tax those who can at least afford to fund this. It's going to be used for health and social care levy, of course, isn't it? But aren't there better ways of doing that?
Well, let me just first say what this new levy does. It kicks in today, the new health and social care levy. It's all of the funding raised from it is going to go towards the extra £39 billion we're going to put in over the next 3 years into health and social care. It's going to pay in the NHS for activity levels that are some 130% of pre-pandemic. It's going to be 9 million more scans, tests and procedures, meaning people will get seen a lot earlier. Why is any of this necessary, whether it's for health or social care? It's because of the impact of the pandemic. We know it's unprecedented. It's been the biggest challenge in our lifetime, and the impact of that is going to continue for many years. You asked me about the fairness of it. When we spend money on public services, whether it's NHS or anything else for that matter, the money can only come from two sources. It's either you raise it directly from people today, that's through taxes, or you borrow it, which is essentially you're asking the next generation to pay for it. I think it is right that we pay for what we are going to use as a country, but we do it in a fair way. And this levy, the way it's being raised is the top 15% of earners will pay almost 50%, and I think it's the right way to do this.
If you were Chancellor, and you're still Chancellor, and you saw 500,000 kids falling into absolute poverty because of your measures, would you think twice?
I think, look, I am not Chancellor, I'm the Health Secretary, and my job is to make sure that we're doing everything we can to recover from the pandemic when it comes to health and social care. But when it comes to the Treasury and the Chancellor and the support that's been provided, I think that the focus is absolutely right. When it comes to the cost of living, I don't think anyone out there listening thinks that the government can mitigate a worldwide inflation crisis in every way for every single person. But what government can do is support those that need it most. And the actions that we've taken on energy bills, for example, with £9 billion of support on the new hardship fund for local authorities for those that are most vulnerable, and also, most importantly of all, of supporting work. The best way out of poverty for anyone is in work. We've now, in this country, we've got one of the lowest unemployment rates that this country has ever seen, the lowest youth unemployment rate we've had for decades. And that doesn't happen by accident. It's happening because of the policies of this government, and we're supporting those people in work with more tax cuts.
OK. As Health Secretary then, as you pointed out to me, is it acceptable to administer an electric shock to someone who feels that they are in the wrong body?
No, I don't think so. No, of course not.
So why has that been removed from the bill for the Queen's speech? So transgender people would still undergo that sort of conversion therapy, which sounds inhumane to me.
Well, when it comes to conversion therapy, it is absolutely right, as the government has said, that we ban the so-called conversion therapy for LGBT people. When it comes to trans, I do think that we need to be more careful. You asked me again as Health Secretary. In my mind is, for example, is the recent report by Dr. Hilary Cash. She's one of the most experienced paediatricians in this country. She just published an interim report just a few weeks ago, and she talked about how children and young people, when they say they have gender dysphoria, it is right for medical experts to be able to question that and to determine what the cause might be. Is it a genuine case of gender identity dysphoria, or could it be that that individual is suffering from some child sex abuse, for example, or could it be linked to bullying? So I think it is right to take the approach that we have, which is to ban conversion therapy for LGB, but to take a much more sort of sensitive approach when it comes to trans.
Yeah, but again, my question is, does that include allowing people to have an electric shock because they feel they're in the wrong body? It sounds inhumane to me.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And there are also already, there are many laws in place that you should prevent anything of that type.
But that's
anything
part of the therapy, isn't it? It can be
anything
used.
dangerous.
Should that be against the law?
Well, I don't think that anyone should be administered with electric shock for the reasons that you're saying, and there are laws currently in place that would protect. I think that would count as abuse, and it would already be against the law.
Okay. Thanks very much for clarification on that. I'm sure that will develop further throughout the course of the day, but I do want to ask you, if I may, about COVID and the new guidelines that were being given. Apparently there's 9 separate symptoms now as far as COVID is concerned that you should be checking for before you go to work. One of them includes there they go. One of them includes tiredness or a headache. If you've got tiredness or a headache, would you still go to work?
No, if I had, first of all, I think it's absolutely right as we learn more about COVID and also as we come across new variants, that our experts update the symptoms list. There are still 3 major symptoms, but it's right that others have been added just to give people a bit more information about what may or may not be COVID. Now, just taking any 1 or 2 of those, you've just picked headaches and tiredness, doesn't in itself say that you've got COVID. You may have, but especially if you've got some of the more where we have more information. So, for example, if you have a sense of loss of your taste, or if you have a cough that's developed that you didn't have before, or if you have a fever, those are the 3 main symptoms people should look out for. To answer your question directly, if I had a headache or I was feeling a bit tired, it depends how tired I felt. I might want to get some more sleep, and if I had a bit of headache, I'd first reach for the Nurofen.
As a Secretary of State, I'm sure you're pretty tired almost all of the time. Very busy job, I'm sure. Talk to me about Keir Starmer. He has said that despite what the Prime Minister told us, he presided over widespread criminality in his office, talking about Partygate. What should happen as far as Partygate fines are concerned? Dominic Raab has said that it was what happened there was against the law. Do you agree that the Prime Minister presided over widespread criminality in his office?
Look, what I agree with is, I think what we have all learnt over the last few months is that there were, certainly there are events that took place in Downing Street during the height of the pandemic that needed to and are being properly investigated. They should be investigated by the proper authorities, and that's exactly what's happening. The police are continuing their investigations, as I understand it, but this is really a matter for the police. I don't think it's appropriate for ministers, any minister, including myself, to talk about what the police may or may not do.
Well, they've already issued 20 fines, and when we were talking about COVID, you did want to answer my question directly, so if I could ask this one again, please. Did the Prime Minister, forgive me, preside over widespread criminality in his office?
Well, when you ask me about COVID, that's the matter that relates directly to me and my job, and it's not something for an independent authority. When you're asking about matters of the law, this is rightly in a democracy like ours. It's not a matter for ministers. It is a matter for the police.
No, nonsense. The
it's
police
a matter
have told
for the
us
police,
that it's
the
20.
Independent police.
Police have already issued 20 fines. Come on, we know what the police think. I'm asking you whether you agree with the police that there's been widespread criminality in Downing Street.
All I know what the police have published. I know nothing more or less than that. We know about the number
people
of
broke
fines.
the
I
law.
have no idea who has received those fines
we
or
do.
not. But I just hesitate to comment on this further.
We do know who's received at least one of the fines because it was the woman. Yeah, we know. Come on, Minister. We know that at least one person who was in charge of ethics in Downing Street at the time received a fine because she told us that she did. And we know that 19 other fines have been issued as well. On 20 separate occasions, more to come, the law was broken in Downing Street. Ergo, the Prime Minister presided over law breaking in Downing Street.
Look, we will learn more about this, I'm sure, from the police. There will also be a final report from Sue Gray, again, an independent report, and I think that's what I'll wait for before I say anything further.
OK, thanks for joining us. I know you've got a busy day ahead. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us on the programme. Thank you. Let's find out what's happening as far as the papers are concerned. This morning you heard what the Health Secretary said just a few moments ago about the little one who had her contact details written on her back in case her parents were murdered by Putin's henchmen. The Metro reflecting on what's happening in Ukraine. You've been on the vodka. That's the question asked by the Metro after Russia's man at the United Nations tried to deny his country has committed war crimes in Ukraine. Telegraph quotes Ukraine's president in his address to the UN that it should stop Putin and if it can't, it should dissolve itself. While The Guardian leads with Zelensky's renewed demands for Russian leaders to stand trial over their actions. And the Mail has the message from Boris Johnson to the people of Russia, don't let Putin do this in your name. We'll have an eyewitness account from the town of Bucha, where it's alleged Russian troops carried out war crimes. That's coming up shortly, and also on the programme. As Western allies prepare further sanctions against Russia, we'll speak to the former head of the British Army, General Lord Richard Dannett. The leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, will be with me in the studio this morning. His party is calling for a slash in VAT to help families struggling to pay their bills. And with people around the country having to tighten the purse strings as rises in the cost of living begin to bite, we'll hear from Labour's shadow Northern Ireland Secretary. From today, people's take-home pay will be squeezed as an increase in national insurance takes effect. It comes as the prices at petrol pumps are rising at their fastest rate ever. The average cost of a litre of petrol rose by 11.6 pence to end March on 163.3. Diesel prices rose even more sharply, up 22.1 pence per litre to 177.3. The increases came despite Chancellor Rishi Sunak implementing a 5p per litre cut in fuel duty on the 23rd of March. Ivor standing by for us at a forecourt in Essex this morning. More and more expensive to fill up. What are motorists saying where you are this morning, Ivor? Good morning.
Yeah, morning, Kay. Those figures you mentioned are just staggering, aren't they? Especially when you consider just how high prices were already at the beginning of March before these record rises. Here in Abridge in Essex, the prices on the forecourt are just below those ones you were quoting, but still very, very high. And I was speaking to a man just now who was filling up his van. He's a window fitter. He travels quite far for work, today driving to Swindon, and he says he now spends, on average, £75 a day on diesel, which equates to around half of his earnings now. And this is despite that 5p cut in fuel duty from the Chancellor last month that is tantamount to a drop in the ocean, really, compared to these record rises. They're being driven by the war in Ukraine, which is causing surging wholesale costs, and it all, of course, means yet more pain in our pockets. Today is the day that national insurance hike, as you say, comes into force. Millions of us have just had our energy bills at home rocket by around £700 a year. Car tax is going up, council tax going up, water bills going up as well for some. The cost of living crisis and rising prices are inescapable.
OK, thanks a lot. Thank you. Looking at some of today's other headlines for you now. The managing director at Manchester Airport, that's Karen Smart, she's quit after weeks of chaos for travellers. It comes as the airport's management met with political leaders and unions on Tuesday to discuss the current concerning situation as well as pay and conditions. In a statement, Manchester Airport Chief Exec Charlie Cornish said, "I am sorry to lose Karen after her years of valuable service, but also understand her desire to return to the south for family reasons and indeed to explore new career opportunities." While there are sure to be further challenges ahead, are you laughing along with me at home this morning? I'm confident we will soon start to see the benefits of the recovery plans Karen has helped put in place. So it's obviously nothing to do with the chaos at the airport at all. She's just decided to step back for family reasons. That's what MPs usually say. Now, a group of Sri Lankan MPs from the governing party are warning of violence and anarchy within the country unless an interim government isn't put in place. Protesters have continued to demand the resignation of the president, blaming him for the country's worst economic crisis in decades. And Republicans in the American state of Oklahoma have passed a law that will make carrying out an abortion illegal. The measure, which is aimed at doctors, carries a penalty of up to 10 years in prison, and the only exception allowed would be if the mother's life was in danger. Now, back home, it's the biggest shake-up to divorce law in half a century. From today, in England and Wales, married and civil partnership couples will be able to get divorced without having to blame the other person. Aisha Zahid reports.
For Sarah, 13 years of marriage came to a bitter end. What should have been a straightforward divorce was complicated by legislation.
The difficulty was the reasons for the divorce. So you were given 5 options and only one really was suitable for us, which was the unreasonable behaviour. And it didn't really suit our needs because we just simply fell out of love. And we didn't have many bad things in our marriage. So you're almost trying to exaggerate some of the not so nasty things that happen between us. So I guess it just kind of created some kind of animosity between us.
In the biggest change to divorce law in 50 years, new legislation in England and Wales ends the blame game, scrapping the need for couples to apportion the blame for the breakdown of their marriage. It means for the first time, couples can apply for divorce jointly, and one partner refusing a divorce can't stand in the way. They're reforms that experts welcome.
You hear so many stories of people coming out of the divorce process being utterly bereft with huge mental health issues that can lead to debt, and it can lead to the further breakdown of relationships within the family. And so if you have a more amicable way of approaching divorce, you avoid all of those problems.
The government says this new legislation is part of wider action to reform the family justice system. Ultimately, it's hoped it will make an already difficult time that bit more bearable for many. Aisha Zahid, Sky News.
Ed Sheeran, yay, due to find out the result of his High Court battle over the copyright of his 2017 hit, Shape of You. Do you remember it? Of course you do.
I'm in love with your body.
Love it. A judge will give a ruling today over whether his chart-topping single copied elements of Sami Switch's song, Oh Why. Switch is a grime artist. He alleges the OI hook in Shape of You is strikingly similar to an OY refrain in his track, something Sheeran and his team completely deny. We'll give you the latest result as soon as it comes in, expecting that around about 9:30, 9:45. As soon as it comes in, we'll bring that to you live, of course. Meantime, let's find out whether the sun's going to be shining on Ed and the rest of us today.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Turning colder over the next few days with blustery showers, turning increasingly wintry on Thursday. Mostly mild, windy and showery start, but the chilly north of Scotland has more general rain, sleet and hill snow.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Let's tell you about the Home Secretary, should we? Priti Patel. She says police have made the biggest cocaine bust since 2015. Nearly 4 tonnes of the drug, hidden in boxes of bananas, never in my bananas, was seized by the UK Border Force at Southampton Docks last month. The bust was worth an estimated, can you guess? £300 million. That's a lot of bananas, isn't it? Engelbert Humperdinck He has been made an MBE during an investiture service at Windsor Castle. And we've had him on the programme before. Very, very charming man. He's 85 now, can you believe it? He joined a host of other people receiving the royal honours from the Princess Royal, Engelbert, whose real name is not Engelbert Humperdinck, but Arnold Dorsey, rose to prominence in the late 60s with chart-topping hits, including Release Me and Save the Last Waltz. Remember that? Others collecting awards included the rocker Rick Wakeman, the actor Sir Jonathan Pryce, and the former rugby player Rob Burrow. We wish him well, don't we? Breakfast programme this morning. So far, Western allies prepare new sanctions against Russian coal and finance amid growing evidence of war crimes committed by its troops in Ukraine. From today, millions of Britons will have to pay more in national insurance, which the government says will be used to fund the NHS and social care sector. It'll now be easier to end a marriage without assigning blame in the biggest shift to divorce law in England and Wales in 50 years. I want to talk to you in more detail about what's happening in Ukraine, joined by the former head of the British Army, General Lord Richard Dannatt. Hello to my lord, to you, my lord. Thank you for joining us on the programme.
Morning, Kay.
Does Ukraine have to start to consider ceding some land to the Russians in order to achieve peace?
Well, I think President Zelensky is doing a fantastic job. He's leading his country extraordinarily well, and they're fighting with huge determination. I think we can all recognise that. I think they are now realising that they're going to have to increase their operations in the east of the country. That's clearly where the Russians are now going to concentrate their efforts. And it's very good to hear that NATO yesterday, ministers met and agreed to up the sanctions, and many countries bilaterally are supporting Ukraine with more weapons. Their fight is our fight, and it's extremely good that the West is staying united and supporting Ukraine in the way that it is.
Always has to be give and take, though, doesn't there, in order to try to achieve peace. Do you have a view on the Donetsk region?
Okay, unusually, I couldn't quite hear your question. Could you be kind enough to say it again?
Sorry, yes, I said there always has to be give and take when it comes to try to achieving peace. And I wondered if you did have a view on the Donetsk region of Ukraine and what should happen to it.
Well, this is a difficult one. It is a fact that many who live in the Donbass region, those two provinces, are Russian speakers, of course they are, and many of them are focused and oriented towards Russia. But the fact remains that that territory is Ukrainian. Now, this is the great dilemma that President Zelensky is going to have to wrestle with. Is he going to insist that every square kilometre of Ukrainian soil remains Ukrainian soil? Or is he going to have to accept reality on the ground that Luhansk and Donetsk provinces might become occupied by the Russians and might have to be ceded to Russia? And indeed, there is this very difficult issue of the land corridor that the Russians have almost completed achieving between Crimea through Mariupol into the Donbass region. And this, I think, is the great dilemma for Ukraine. It's the great dilemma for the West. Do they compromise and allow those eastern provinces and that corridor to go to Russia? Or do they hold out, do we hold out, continuing to support Ukraine, maybe the West having to up its support in a military sense to Ukraine and insisting that every square kilometre of Ukrainian territory remains Ukrainian? That is a huge dilemma, and I don't think that people have got the answer to that one yet.
And as far as Odessa is concerned, we know, of course, that it's a port city, incredibly important to Ukraine. We were speaking to yesterday just to Tobias Elwood, and he was saying that we need to patrol that. The UN needs to patrol that region on behalf of Ukraine. Do you agree?
Well, Odessa is extraordinarily important. Odessa must remain in Ukrainian hands. It'll be their only major port to get their exports, particularly their wheat grain exports, out into the international sea lanes. So that is extraordinarily important. But you raise an interesting point, whether there should be a third force and intervention at some point in Ukraine. It would be unacceptable to the Russians, certainly, for it to be a NATO force. But it's conceivable there could be some kind of longer-term peacekeeping force, third force under the United Nations flag. People aren't really talking about that at the present moment, but it may be that there has to be some form of policing, some form of international objective, independent observation of whatever ceasefire line eventually is agreed, whether it's in the east, whether it's along the Crimea line, or wherever it is. It's something that may have to be thought about in future in order to have some kind of independent monitoring of what is going on for the future.
I understand that, but what about now, my lord? What do you think should be happening in the Black Sea now?
Well, I think the navies of the world could quite reasonably be patrolling offshore and monitoring and at least keeping under observation the Russian Navy. I think there was a lot of talk early on about the Russians having an amphibious force that might come ashore at Odessa, but I think that the likelihood of that is now quite low, as they have seen the poor performance of their troops on the ground. I think they'd be very wary about risking the highly risky concept of an amphibious operation, perhaps coming ashore at Odessa. So I think for NATO navies of the world to monitor what the Russians are doing makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure consideration is being given to that.
You were very kindly on our programme a couple of weeks ago when you talked about what's happening as far as Putin is concerned, and you said that Russia's actions weren't far off genocide. Where are you today?
Well, I think the war crimes are stacking up to the point that it looks like a concerted effort to reduce the Ukrainian population, and that is getting very close to the definition of genocide. And it's absolutely right and proper that all these war crimes are being chronicled, evidence is being gathered. Now, whether or not we'll ever get to a position where Putin or his senior generals, whether there's ever the possibility of putting them in an international court, in an international dock, I don't know. But if you think back, and other people have made this parallel before, to the dark days, the early dark days of the Bosnian Civil War, it seemed inconceivable that Milosevic and Karadzic and Mladic would find their way into court, but they did. And it became perfectly possible to trace what had happened on the ground all the way up to them through this concept of command responsibility, such that they were convicted. I gave evidence twice in The Hague against Serb generals, and it can be done. So it's absolutely right that war crimes are recorded, evidence is gathered, and this is looking to me increasingly like genocide that is plotted from the top. And the top, therefore, must bear responsibility and maybe one day, even if not in a physical court, in the court of history, be condemned.
We know that, my lord, that you've passed on your philanthropy to your son, and he does a lot of charity work, particularly with Ukraine and, of course, Afghanistan as well. I wonder what your view is on what we're doing up to now to bring Ukrainian nationals into the United Kingdom. I think I read something this morning saying as of last week it was 500.
Well, we've got to do more, we've got to do better, we've got to act more quickly. Now, the British government has set up a scheme. I've looked into the detail of the scheme, and the scheme is there, but we've got to be more agile, we've got to move more quickly. I live in Norfolk. The editor of the Eastern Daily Press, David Poles, was in Ukraine on the Polish border last week and made contact with a large number of refugees who want to come to this country. And there's a team out there helping them do the paperwork and get here. But we should be much more agile, much more quick about it in order to get those people who are traumatized to places of safety and welcome them to this country. The government has put a scheme in place, but they've got to fire it up. They've got to speed it up. They've got to do better. We owe it to those people who have become victims and survivors of that war which the Ukrainians are fighting, but they're fighting it on behalf of all of us for freedom and the rule of law. We've got to do better. We've got to move more quickly to help more people.
OK, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Kay.
Well, the images of bodies that have come out of the town of Bucha on the outskirts of Kiev over the past few days have sparked outrage Right around the world, as you would expect, our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, has visited the town where officials are investigating the killings of civilians. Her report contains distressing images of bodies.
This is no ordinary crime scene. Behind the cordon, yellow plaques numbered from 1 to 6 are all that distinguish the remains of one life from another. Each body burnt beyond recognition. Like so many victims in the town of Bucha, their identities are not yet known. But what is clear is Ukraine's resolve for justice and its rage at Russia.
Друге – це фіксація цих злочинів органами досудового розслідування. Вже розуміємо, що нам не вистачає експертів. Потрібна буде ДНК-лабораторія, тому що навіть тут ви бачите, побачити по облич не залишилось, впізнати ці особи без ДНК буде неможливо.
How can you talk to Vladimir Putin when his forces do this?
Go to hell.
A sentiment also felt keenly by the body collectors of Bucha. Their van arrived already loaded. The police chief says some 1,200 war crimes have been registered so far across the whole Kyiv region.
Більшість смертей, що ми фіксуємо, це у результаті пострілів з артилерії, пострілів, тобто причиною смерті є вибухові і уламкові поранення, а також ми фіксуємо факти катування людей і їх фактичної страти з допомогою автоматичної зброї.
The destruction in this town stands testimony to the trauma unleashed when Russian troops invaded. Their withdrawal a few days ago means investigators can more freely gather eyewitness statements, fingerprints and video evidence. But living with such death is almost too much for the remaining residents to bear. Who do you blame for this?
Только Путина, больше никого. Он на год старше меня, но это полный дурак.
We've not been here very long, but in this small corner of Bucha, we've already counted 8 bodies. There are many more houses and gardens yet to be searched. Ukrainians say that every death is going to be investigated and cases built so that prosecutions for war crimes can be heard. Down the road, 3 more stolen lives, discarded in death. But further evidence for Ukraine's investigators. Their goal is justice, so the victims of Russia's war can finally rest in peace. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Bucha.
Ali's here. We were chatting to the Health Secretary about this, weren't we? And he stopped short of saying regime change, but he was absolutely appalled and continues to be appalled about what's happening in Ukraine. Also wanted to talk to us in more detail about what's going to happen here, because there's a national insurance rise from today.
Yeah, that's right. That's going to be the big domestic story today. We know that already this month we've had energy bills rising for lots of people. We've had council tax rising. This is the controversial national insurance rise, breaking a Conservative manifesto pledge. We know that the Chancellor in the spring statement raised the threshold at which people start to pay national insurance. That means that if you earn less than about £35,000, actually you won't necessarily, that comes in July, it's all a bit complicated, but over the year you won't necessarily have to pay more. But for everyone earning above that, this is going to add to all of the other costs, the impact that people are feeling. We know that inflation is being dwarfed by benefits. So benefits rather being dwarfed by inflation. So it's having a big impact on a lot of people. Okay.
Ali's take at 9 o'clock. Looking forward to it. Thanks very much, Ali. Thank you. So what happens now? What impact will the images from Ukraine have on the course of the war in Ukraine? Well, on Thursday, Mark will be speaking to one of Putin's closest advisors, and that's his press secretary, Dmitry Peskov. You can watch it live on Sky. Meantime, you can see Ed Davey has joined us. Lots to talk about this morning. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Should we start with cost of living? National insurance is going up today. Put that to the Health Secretary. He says there's no alternative.
I disagree. When people are facing huge rises in their energy bills, food bills,
cost of filling the car. This is just the wrong time for the Conservatives to be adding all these unfair tax rises. Let's remember, it's not just the national insurance tax rise. They've frozen the income tax allowance, bringing lots of low-paid people into tax for the first time. This is just the wrong timing when people are struggling so much. That's why Liberal Democrats are arguing for an emergency tax cut. We think VAT should come down to 17.5%. That would give people, on average, £600 a year in less VAT. That's the sort of bold measure that's needed given these difficult times.
How do you make that calculation?
Well, first of all, it's going to cost about 18 billion, so it's quite a big measure. But if you look at the fine print of the budget statement, they're dragging in £40 billion in extra VAT because of inflation, because prices are going up. The Chancellor gets extra money from VAT. So I think the least he could do is use this sort of tax cut that Liberal Democrats are putting forward to help people.
OK. You say that the average family will pay an extra £430 in VAT compared to last year. How do you make that calculation?
Well, if you look at the amount of money that they were predicting a year ago from VAT, the receipts into the Exchequer, because inflation's gone up so much and is predicted to go up much, the government is now forecasting, the independent Office of Budget Responsibility is now forecasting they'll rake in £38.2 billion extra over this Parliament. That's a huge amount of extra tax. And if you break that down on a yearly basis for every family, it's over £400 in VAT this year alone, on top of national insurance, on top of freezing income tax allowance. That's why we think the Conservatives just lost the plot. They are piling on these unfair tax rises time and again when people are struggling with their bills.
Yeah, but the Chancellor was a hero, wasn't he, during the pandemic? He managed to keep so many people still being paid week after week after week under the furlough scheme. He's got to pay for it somehow.
Well, Liberal Democrats supported the furlough scheme, and that's right, and let's have cross-party agreement where we can. However, we've got to look at fair ways of raising the money that we need. So Liberal Democrats were the first party to argue for a windfall tax on the soaring profits of the oil and gas companies. It's just wrong that they're profiteering so much from this rise in oil and gas prices, which is hitting businesses and, of course, hitting families and pensioners across the UK. So Liberal Democrats want a fairer system where we tax the profits with a windfall tax of the oil and gas companies and use that to cut taxes on families.
On Monday, I think it was, Monday, the Wales Secretary sat exactly where you are now, Simon Hart, and he told us that the world has moved on from Partygate. Has it?
I don't think so. I've been going up and down the country talking to people ahead of the local elections. I was in Hull the other week, Somerset the week before, so around the country. And it's something that ordinary people are bringing up unprompted. I think they feel that Boris Johnson is not a decent Prime Minister, that he's broken the law, that he's lied to Parliament, and they expect more from a Prime Minister. And what's really staggering is lifelong Conservative voters don't think he's a decent Prime Minister. That's what we found in Chesham and Amersham when we beat the Conservatives. Liberal Democrats beat the Conservatives in True Blue Buckinghamshire. It's what we found in North Shropshire, a seat held by the Conservatives for 200 years. Liberal Democrats beat them. And part of the reason, another reason was ambulance waiting times and the awful deal for farmers that the government have concluded. But another reason was lifelong Conservatives saying this Tory Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is not fit to be Prime Minister.
I'm going to have to unpack that for you because we don't know that the Prime Minister's broken the law. We'll have to wait and see what the police say. He certainly looks as though he has presided over law-breaking in Downing Street. Is that enough for him to step down, some might say? And also we've heard from the Ukrainian leader who's praising him to the skies.
Well, let's deal with Ukraine because that's such a critical issue. I'm actually quite in praise of Ben Wallace. Ben is the
Secretary.
Yeah, he's the Secretary for Defence, and he's been leading the support for Ukraine. President Zelensky, no doubt, is praising Johnson. The real person I think we should all praise is actually Ben Wallace. And here you are, me, a Liberal Democrat, praising Conservative Minister because I'm trying to be balanced. But Boris Johnson, we've now begun to see through him. And I was at school in my constituency the other day, and unprompted, these teenage people said, "Sir, was it a party or was it a work event?" And I said to them, "You tell me." Do you know what they said?
No.
It was a party. You know, people can see for their own eyes what happened. I think the Prime Minister should have resigned before. I think Tory MPs should have sacked him for his failure to resign. And frankly, whether or not the Met Police ultimately give him one of these notices, the people in my constituency and around the country, they've passed a judgment. He's guilty of breaking the law.
Even if he is, and even if he has misled Parliament, we'll have to wait to see. The opposition, which includes you and the SNP and, of course, Labour, doesn't seem to have enough strength to do anything about it. Now, you'll say to me that it has to be Tory backbenchers that make the difference. But there has to be some strong-arm tactics from the opposition as well, and it just doesn't seem to be there.
Yeah, but your viewers have got some power in this. They've got to say, your viewers, if they send a message at the ballot box in the local elections, I would argue by electing strong local Liberal Democrat champions in the local council, sends a really powerful message. They can help get rid of Boris Johnson. So your viewers, I really want to tell them this, tell the Conservative Party, tell Boris Johnson, tell Conservative MPs that he has to go.
And if they don't, will you eat your words?
Well, I think from the people I've spoken to, they want to do that. We saw that they did that in Cheshire and Amersham. We saw they did that in North Shropshire, where Liberal Democrats beat Conservatives when no one expected us to. And my feeling from the doorsteps is that the voters want this Prime Minister to go. They don't think he's decent. They don't think he's fair. And the way he and Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, have responded to the cost of living crisis is frankly a scandal. They either don't seem to care, they don't get it, and they're doing absolutely nothing, and that's not acceptable.
If they don't, if my loyal viewers do not vote against the Prime Minister, do you have to acknowledge that we've moved on from Partygate?
Well, I don't like predicting what the voters are going to do before they have done it, so let's wait to see. Certainly the evidence is they are very unhappy with the Prime Minister, rightly, not just for Partygate, but for the way he's been running the country. Let's see. I mean, I'm pretty optimistic. I think if you go around the country, you know, I was in Harrogate the other day, I'm going to Wimbledon today, we're picking up in those Liberal Democrat battlegrounds that people want to send the government a message, and I can't blame them, given how badly they've handled both Partygate and the cost of living crisis.
Lots of Labour politicians who've been sitting where you are have said to me that they want Rishi Sunak to go for Partygate indiscretions as well. What do you think?
Well, the evidence on him is less than the Prime Minister. The evidence against the Prime Minister, I think, is overwhelming. There is certainly evidence against the Chancellor. I probably haven't viewed that as carefully as I should. I think the Chancellor, the Chancellor certainly has a lot of questions to answer over Partygate. That is absolutely.
But if he's broken the law, should he?
If he's broken the law, he should go, of course.
And if he gets a fixed penalty notice, he's broken the law.
Yeah,
he would get a fixed penalty notice if he was in the cabinet room when there was cake.
Listen, if that.
You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're right to go there. I think you're right. I mean, people expect, your viewers expect, politicians who set the rules, that they should keep the rules. There's not one rule for them and another rule for the rest of us. That is just unfair. It's not British. It's not the tradition of our great country. Okay. And if Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak are trouncing the rule of law and trouncing British traditions, that is not acceptable, and they should go.
OK. Unfortunately, I'd love to talk to you for longer, but we're out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much. We'll see you, won't we, at Prime Minister's Questions. I'm sure you'll be asking a question later on. For now, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. That's about it for the first hour of the programme.